My dear students, I would like to discuss the concepts and objectives of tax planning. Whenever we study income tax, we used to refer the Income Tax Act 1961 with the Finance Act of the relevant financial year. But going into detailed discussion about the concept and objectives of tax planning, I would like to recapitulate certain items which you have already studied. We know that as per Income Tax Act 1961, we have 5 types of heads of income. They are income from salary, income from house property, profit and gains of business or profession, income from capital gains, and income from other source. So, for an assessee, he or she may have all heads of income. And as per Income Tax Act, all assessees have to pay the tax against their income, because all the persons which have been defined under section 2 subsection 31 are required to pay tax against their income. Now, all the assessees are required to pay tax against their income, there is no doubt, and you have to check what are the different heads of income that I have already discussed. I may have the income from salary, I may have the income from house property, I may have profits and gains of business or profession, I may have capital gains, or I may have income from other source. So, we have to aggregate all these things, because tax is one tax. We know the tax to be paid on aggregate income. So, how do you compute? In undergraduate studies, we have computed the total income or taxable income. First, you have to compute the gross total income, which is comprised with the 5 heads of income like salary, house property, profit and gains of business or profession, capital gains, and income from other source. After getting the gross total income, you have to do deductions under chapter 6A, which is provided by the Income Tax Act. Now, after deducting the amount of deduction under chapter 6A, you will get the total income or taxable income. This is the taxable income on which the tax liability is computed. So, all the assessees, whether corporate or non-corporate, try to minimize their tax liability. The objective of the tax planning is to maximize the net of tax income. But how an assessee can minimize his tax liability? This is the question, because after all, these are hard-earned money. So, we should try to keep more and more money in our pocket. But how it is possible? As an assessee, as a member of the civic society, we have to pay tax to the government, because this is an important source of revenue in the hands of the government, and government is utilizing this revenue for the social development. So, it is our duty to pay the tax in time to the government. But as well as, since it is our hard-earned money, we will try to keep the maximum amount of money in our pocket, or the take-home money should be maximum. But how it is possible? That is to protect the interest of the assessee. The Income Tax Act provides certain provisions which can be used in a justified way, so that we can minimize our tax. It is our legitimate right to minimize the tax liability within the legal framework by taking the advantage of tax provision. So, every assessee can try to minimize his tax liability. But how? There are 3 processes that can be used to minimize the tax. One is tax planning, number 2 tax evasion, and third is tax avoidance. So, in 3 ways we can minimize our tax liability. But which one you will follow? Let us explain one by one. What is tax planning? Tax planning, it is well thought out scheme of taxpayers to reduce their tax burden by methods which are sound and legal. It is an attempt to minimize the tax in permissible way without breaking any law. So, I have already told the Income Tax Act provides certain deductions, certain allowances, certain incentives for the benefit of the assessee. So, we have to utilize that provisions to minimize our tax liability. This is the tax planning. How do we utilize those tax provisions which will give us the tax benefit in terms of deductions, in terms of incentives, in terms of allowances, etc. So, all these provisions have been provided by the Tax Act. So, we have to utilize those provisions for our benefit so that we can maximize our net of tax amount. Tax planning is an important tool in the hands of all assessors all over the world. Everywhere it is happening because every person is trying to minimize his tax liability. This is the only way which has been permitted by the Act by which we can minimize our tax. Suppose you are taking a taxi for your university class from your residence. So, you can ride a taxi and direct your taxi driver to take the shortest route. The taxi driver can take you in different way to maximize the fare, but you can direct your taxi driver to take the shortest route. The higher charges can be minimum. So, what you have done, that is planning. Planning for what? Planning to minimize your taxi fare. So, this is the permissible way, this is the planning. In the same way, you can minimize your tax by taking the advantage of tax incentives, tax deductions, allowances which have been provided by the Income Tax Act. This is the only way to minimize your tax within the legal framework. Then comes the tax evasion. It is a method of evading tax liability by dishonest means like suppression of sales, inflation of expenses, concealment of income, etc. So, obviously it is a criminal offense. You are deliberately avoiding the tax or evading the tax by representing the false statement. So, it cannot be accepted. You can minimize your tax liability by tax evasion. You are evading the tax, you are escaping the tax by evading by dishonest means like falsification of statement, of account, etc. So, this is not accepted at all. Next comes tax avoidance. Avoidance of tax is not tax evasion. It is a method of reducing tax liability by taking advantage of certain loopholes in the law. Everybody we know, in the world nothing is foolproof. There may be some loopholes. So, one can take that advantage of loopholes in the Act which can be utilized to minimize the tax liability. It is not punishable, but it is also economic, may be treated as economic offense because it is also not accepted in the eye of law. The assessee is taking the advantage of the loopholes. Let us take an example on tax planning. Suppose for the assessment year 2018-19, I have a total income of 5 lakhs. Total income means it is the aggregated income. Taking into consideration, suppose I have salary income, I have house property income, I have a business income, I have capital gains, I have other sources. So, after aggregating all these income, I have arrived at 5 lakhs rupees and tax liability would be rupees 12,500 as per the rate provided by the Income Tax Act applicable for the 2018-19. If I invest in PPF, suppose rupees 2,50,000. So, I may avail the deduction under section 80C. It is provided in the Act. In this case, the total income will come down 2,50,000. The tax liability would be nil because up to 2,50,000 the tax liability would be nil for the individual. So, this is tax planning where I am claiming the tax benefit as provided by the law. So, within the purview of the law, we are taking the advantage of the tax incentives or allowances to minimize our tax. I have told you that we have 5 heads of income. So, each case, in each heads of income, there are certain allowances, there are certain deductions. So, you have to select the options which have been provided in the Act. It may be under the head of salary, it may be under the head house property, it may be under the head of profit and gains of business or profession or capital gains. In each head, the Income Tax Act provides certain deductions and certain allowances. So, in case of tax planning, you have to follow those sections in detail to judiciously for the benefit of the assessee. Now, objectives of tax planning. So there is no doubt about the importance of tax planning. The tax planning is the order of the day. This is the only way to minimize our tax in a legal way. Nobody can stop you if you minimize your tax within the legal framework by utilizing the deductions or allowances as provided by the Act. Now, you may ask, why should we go for the tax planning? But so far we have discussed, by this time you have come to know the importance of tax planning, which is now recognized all over the world. The objectives we may summarize as to lowering the tax liability. This is the main objective of our tax planning, because every assessee tries to get the maximum benefit from his income. So the first objective is to lower the tax liability. If we are able to lower the tax liability, we can maximize our amount in our hand, that is, maximize our tax savings from the allowable deductions allowances which have been provided by the Act. So if we maximize our tax savings, the amount will remain with us, so it will maximize our net of tax income. That portion can be invested by us, by the assessee, for further income. So by lowering the tax liability, in one hand we maximize the tax savings from the allowable deductions, on the other hand we maximize the net of tax income. Net of tax income maximization means we are keeping more and more money against our income after paying the tax to the government. So it is our legitimate right to minimize the tax liability and to maximize the net of tax income, so that we can keep the money more and more in our pocket and we invest that portion of the money in different investment plan. In that way, the capital formation can also be done or can also be increased. And the last one is very important. We have learned the tax planning, we have learned the tax avoidance, and we have learned the tax evasion. But if we follow the tax planning in a proper way, because in defining the tax planning we have told that it is a plan which is chalked out about to minimize our tax liability within the legal framework. So if we chalk out it properly, the tax planning, we can avoid the penalty. There will be no prosecution. We are getting the advantage of tax benefit from the various provisions like deductions, allowances which have been provided by the Income Tax Act. So nobody can disturb you. We can avoid the penalty. So at the end we can summarize. So far we have discussed the concept of tax planning, which is very important for minimizing tax liability within the legal framework. Thank you.